at the very last slide are my email details and my my WhatsApp details. So if you feel that we've gone through a whole lot of stuff, but there's still something you're looking for an answer, we'd like to keep the emails. We'd like you to feel comfortable that you can email us at any time about anything, and there's nothing so trivial that it's not worth asking. So please don't worry that you're going to be interrupting big important things. We're here to take whatever inquiries, and we recognize fully the nature of the partnership that we have with you in your sons and our college boys' welfare. So with all of that said, just I am recording this session, and we will make that available, so in case parents haven't been able to get here. So we've got a good turnout, but if parents haven't been able to join us, we'll put this available to them on a link as well. And so just some of the broad principles around coming back to school. We want to find that absolute sweet spot between having evaluated all of the risks and addressed and mitigated all the risks that we can, and at the same time still having a program that's worth coming back to. Our guiding principle right from the very beginning here has been, if there's nothing to come back to, or if the requirements of return are so stringent that it takes so much out of the experience, then there's no point. We must continue online until such time as that is met. And one of the ways that we've been assessing risk, this is just a screenshot of one of many, many pages from our risk analysis. And so our COVID planning committee, which is the people on your screen plus others, from time to time we have different people on the committee depending on what particular area of the school we're talking about. But the people on the screen are here because they relate directly to boy-facing sort of issues. But a lot of consideration has gone on behind the scenes, and there are a whole range of policies and workplace protocols and a number of documents that are layers behind this, so that we're able to say we've thought through a whole range of different issues. We put that to council last Friday, and we've discussed in detail, and we feel that in terms of our readiness, we are able to run a school that has thought of the risk. We've mitigated the risks, but of course you can't eliminate COVID risk, and so everything that we say from here on is premised on the basis that we've taken every step that we know in order to mitigate and to minimize the risk. And of course, we're never going to be able to eliminate the risk. The only real elimination is when a vaccination or something like that appears. So those are the broad principles. We wanted to, obviously, looking at how we could work the school, one of the issues that we had to address right early on is the fact that we have a very unusual campus. There are not many schools around the world, actually. I can think of Sherborne in England, who shares a similar sort of situation to us, where our school is interspersed with a whole lot of public thoroughfares and roads, and is dotted higgledy-piggledy sort of through the town. And so that created its own challenges for us, and it soon became apparent that our way of managing bubbles would have to be quite carefully thought through. And so really everything I say tonight is premised on the fact that we will get our boys back to school. We will have at least a 2-week period of establishing some sort of equilibrium where we have very stringent measures to make sure that we've absolutely minimized risk. And then we assess from there. And once we have an established equilibrium in a school, we can regard the school as a bubble. We then can begin loosening the intra sort of school contact, because while we'll still be very strict in terms of external contact with the schools, it gives us opportunity to gradually begin releasing more activities into the general play. And as you would appreciate, yesterday's news in terms of COVID is as good as last year's news. So we do meet often, and we do discuss these things often. And so our formal committee meets at least once a week, if not more, in its various sort of sub-discussions. And at the same time, we meet with DSG at least once a week and often more regularly, to try and make sure that there is a coordination between our entire family of schools. So that's the broad set of principles. In terms of how we see the phasing working, and this is unofficial, I had a conversation with Lebogang Monjani this afternoon, and Lebogang is the executive director of ISASA. And what Lebogang is working with a whole range of other sort of independent school bodies and the National Department of Basic Education, they're looking at ways of freeing us to phase our phases according to our own individual readiness as independent schools. And so based on the ideal sorts of numbers and the distancing and the readiness in terms of protocols and sanitizing and all of those important factors, the independent sector feels that we are able to judge our own readiness to phase in grades. So Lebogang is of the view that it's imminent in the next day or so that we would be given in writing from ISASA a directive that we are free to phase according to our own sense of readiness. And so these are how us and, in fact, DSG have seen that scenario playing out. These are very provisional dates, and it could be that things come back to us and are different. But if what we were told today is the same when it comes back from government, this is what it will look like. And what we've tried to do is to give a staggered start. And that's for two reasons. One, for the practicality of getting down to Grahamstown. We recognize that a number of people will be busing or traveling down by car. And we also recognize that a number of, if our flight plans do work, and I'll talk about our travel arrangements in a moment, if we are able to mobilize some form of air transport, then having a staggered date is good. But also just in terms of our own logistics, having a group arrive and be able to orientate them, to settle them in, to train them around all the various things that we're going to be doing, it just gives us space that we're dealing with smaller numbers. And so these are those provisional dates. The minute we have anything definite, we'll send out one of those routine COVID communiques so that you'll be able to have a look at it for yourself in writing as an official document. So one of the documents that we sent to you was the actual policy for reopening. And it lists two conditions that are necessary for reopening. The one I've just spoken about, we need government approval, and lockdown, everything has to be right. And as we see that now under level 3 and what the Minister of Education has said, we would be able to open for our South African students under level 3. And we're hoping that for our international students under level 2, and that the gap between level 3 and level 2 isn't drawn out. So we could possibly, for over-border students, still see a window of opportunity opening for a term 2 return, but in all practical thinking, once you've taken into account quarantine and that sort of thing, we really are hoping for a term 3 return for over-border candidates, if not before. The second condition, of course, is that our risk analysis has to show that we're prepared, we've got all the policies and the protocols and all the safety requirements have been met. And we are pretty sure that that's the case. We're comfortable with it. We've sent it up to Johannesburg to an external health and safety consultant who is looking through all of that. Just so what we've tried to do in all of the things that we've done is we'll be pretty sure that we're right, but there's no roadmap for this situation. So, for example, when we are discussing matters medical, we don't want to just think that we're right. We'll send it to our medical panel of medical experts. And similarly, with all the health and safety stuff, we're pretty sure we're right. And we certainly know that we're way in excess of what the Department of Basic Education requirements are. But we want to know that according to expert opinion of sort of best health and safety practice that we've done it right. So those are the two considerations, one being government permission, and secondly, that we've had external people look at our procedures and that the risk is considered acceptable. In terms of returning and the obligation to return, we understand that these are most extraordinary times, and so we're not saying we open and you have to be back to school. We would like parents to look at what we are able to offer. We'd like our boys to be able to look at what we're able to offer, and I'll be talking to the boys later again, not tonight, but at a later date, so that they're able to see what we're able to offer. They're able to think intelligently about the risk, and they're able to think about what the value adds are about coming back to school, and they're able to make a decision based on that. And so the online program, and of course we recognize that a whole lot of people can't come back whether they want to or not. So the online backbone continues, and we'll have Mr. Smith talking to us about how that's going to look. It will be slightly changed to make allowance for the fact that we do have an on-campus presence, but we're going to give you a lot of detail about that in a moment. I've spoken about the phasing and why we're doing the phasing. I've spoken a bit about school as a bubble. I will just mention why we're regarding our bubble to be so much bigger. I mean, where you read about bubbles, you'll find all sorts of different ideal sizes of bubbles, and in fact the concept comes from New Zealand, where the ideal bubble size is somewhere around 12. Because our campus is open, because our boys have to travel through public space to get to, for example, food or to academic classrooms, and also because we have 6 boarding houses and 5 grades, to bubble according to grade just didn't really work for us. And we're absolutely certain that if our boys are very disciplined in terms of the hygiene, in terms of the protocols, in terms of the classroom and so on, that we can mitigate risk really well, in fact. And so that raises the importance of all of those hygiene factors, and you'll see the emphasis of that in our policy. So there's been a lot of discussion around what school will look like when the boys return. And obviously week 1 and week 2 are absolutely critical weeks, because if we have a disaster in those weeks, or if our systems fall down in those weeks, it makes it very difficult for us to avoid some sort of catastrophic return home or something like that. So we've thought really hard about what the first 2 weeks are going to look like. And of course, there would be no point in the boys coming to school if they weren't going to lessons. And so we've premised our thinking around that the boys need contact time with their teachers. But we've also had to think around the fact that not all boys will be back, either by choice or by the fact that they can't, even if they wanted to. So the online program continues in a modified form. So you could imagine me giving my chemistry lesson. Well, I did today with my grade 8 class. I was in my chemistry lab. I was literally doing the experiments in an environment where the boys are back at school. They would be in the class with me. And we would have all the technology so that we can beam that lesson out through Zoom, and all the materials and all the worksheets and all the readings will still be on Classroom for offline access or online access, out of lesson access by both the boys who were in that lesson and the boys who were accessing it online. And because of the bubble system, and initially the DSG and the St. Andrews bubble will be separate entities, what that means in practical terms is that a DSG teacher might be teaching from wherever, and our boys would be in class accessing that lesson online and going through the exercises and whatever in the normal fashion. So that's how the day will look. We've also built into that day, and Mr. Smith will talk in detail about this in a moment, but what we've built into that day is opportunity for in-class tutorial sessions where the boys can meet their teacher and go through, it's like in a maths lesson, you go through the lesson, you sort of follow the whole thing, and then you start doing the exercises, you get stuck, you need some tutorial time, and you just need to get through that step. And so we'll have those tutorial sessions. And of course, the Zoom connection will still be there. So a student who's been going through the work online can still raise the question via Zoom, much like we're doing here. Or in fact, this is a webinar, so it's an indirect sort of route to me. But in a normal Zoom with a normal class, there's a much more free flow of information. It's not perfect. You don't get that warmth of human connection and the real feel of the lesson, but it is what it is for the circumstances that we face. So that's what it looks like in the first 2 weeks, and it's really critical that we get that right so that we don't have any systems failure. And then in the each week, or in between times, even midweek, in between cycles, we meet as our panel. We look at all the events as they've unfolded, and we look at how we can begin revising the program. And of course, that this whole 2 week and beyond also has an extramural program to it. So in the initial time, you could imagine that sports time is going to be limited in terms of contact. We'd love to come back and play a game of rugby against Grey. That would be my dream come true, but it's not responsible, and it's not legal, and it's not going to happen. But what we can do is come back and have very carefully planned fitness programs, running all the various conditioning programs that Lawrence Christie and his team and all the rugby and hockey staff have been working on. So we can begin gradually building up the sporting and the fitness and the levels of activity. After 2 weeks, and of course, subject to all conditions being green in terms of risk and how it's progressed, you now have a bubble that's been together with itself for 2 weeks, and you can begin contemplating how you gradually move towards a more sort of contact environment amongst those particular boys. So I can't say what it's going to look like. What I do know is that our intention is to begin being more and more active, more and more sports. We could certainly look at how we could get house activities going. Inter-school activities are still a very outside bet because of the laws of the country, and in fact, the risk of having any sort of contact with other people outside of your bubble. So, but if it happened, and this is a very fast-moving story, and so as fast as this has come upon us, we don't know how it's going to change. It could deteriorate, or it could get better quickly. If it were to happen that we got to August and suddenly we had been moved to level 1 or level 0 because of the way that the virus had worked its way through, then we're ready to begin inter-school sport. We've in fact got a whole lot of things penciled in, which at the moment are just dreams. You plan for the worst and you hope for the best, but whatever happens, we know we've got something up our sleeve. And so if all of our dreams came true and all the virus was gone and risk was great, and a couple of games of rugby against some key players and some good old hockey on the Astro is what we've got in our book, but we don't know. And every step of the way we'll be communicating with parents so that they're able to make informed decisions of their own. We're not going to make those decisions for you. Obviously, the medical framework is really important, and I'll ask Carol Muirhead to talk us through some of these aspects, but really just some of the key principles are that we know that we have in place some really good procedures for isolating, for quarantining, for contact tracing, and for caring for boys who either fall sick through something unrelated to COVID, or fall sick and we suspect that they have a COVID-related illness. We do not pretend that we have the facilities at the school or in Grahamstown to treat a seriously sick child. And so if you read our document, you'll see at each step of the way, we've tried to put in place a return of the child to home. But if that weren't possible, we're pretty confident that certainly our processes here at school are pretty robust, and our ability to get sick children to Port Elizabeth or home is good. So those are the key principles. Before I move to Carol, Graham, I see quite a few Q&As. I don't know if you want me to pause here or if you want to just hear it all out and ask questions later.
Alan, perhaps something to start off with is the whole question of health. And, you know, we read, and a few people have made this comment, we read a lot about children, you know, not, you know, contracting it in the first instance, not getting that sick, not passing it on. So that's what we read in the press. And then, you know, the kinds of things that you're talking about, and certainly I understand the risk issues, but, you know, everything we read in the press kind of doesn't necessarily add up with the stringent nature of the controls and the social distancing and wearing face masks 24 hours and bubbles all over the show and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, so that's a good point. And what we have to do is find the balance between, there's a wide range of opinions, from complete denialists to people who are really concerned. And I think there is a whole range of opinion, and there's a whole lot of evidence that people can draw to support their opinion. So what we're trying to do is to walk a really sensible route, recognizing that there are risks. I would hate to rush in here all gung-ho and we end up with a fatality because we didn't think of something. So certainly the first 2 weeks are important. It's important that our boys don't start getting sick, and it's important that our staff don't start getting sick, because they are a genuine or much more significant risk. So if you read the preamble to the medical protocol, you'll see we recognize the fact that the symptomatic risk and the transmission risk amongst children is low, but we're in a situation where, as a school, if we said, it's all fine, there's low risk, let's just come back and everything's great, we'd be irresponsible, and in fact, we'd be acting outside the law. We are required to, everything that we do and everything that we've done and put together here is required of us. It's not that we just thought this is a great idea, we're going to make this up and have a good time. So I think it's trying to find that balance. We know what our boys would want to see. We know what our staff want to see, and it's pretty much the same thing. So it's a question of making sure that you get there intelligently. If you rush there on day one, you run well, it's possible nothing could happen, but if something happened, and God forbid you're in that situation, you've put people at unnecessary risk that you haven't thought about or mitigated. And that's not good for the individuals concerned. It's certainly not good for the school. And we couldn't in good faith tell people we're going to take care of your kids and then not. So the wearing of masks is mandatory by South African lockdown regulations. And we will, as we go along, week and day by day, know where it's working, where it's not working, and be able to make adjustments. So what I'm describing here is really our initial steps towards, we're not going to normalize quickly, but it's towards a more normal sort of school environment. That's our objective. I mean, if we could have a completely normal school environment from day one, that's what we'd be aiming for. But we have to get there. Graham, I don't know if that answers. I've rambled on.
Yes, Alan. And then perhaps just talk a little bit more about the children and their interaction with both academic and non-academic staff, and I guess, you know, people in the dining hall and that kind of thing, and people traveling in from far away and that kind of thing.
So our boys would be in the boarding house together. They would go down to their meals together. They would eat in their same dining halls as usual. The difference being that the meal times are staggered, so you wouldn't have the entire house eating all at the same time, because we want them to be able to spread. So there would be just a staggered approach to the meal takings. And the normal old salad bar wouldn't be there. There's quite a strict protocol around how food is served and how that is managed. The boys would then go to class in their normal classes. If it is a St Andrews teacher, they'll be in the classroom with their St Andrews teacher. If it's a DSG teacher, they'll still be together in their classroom as their class, with the lesson being beamed in online, as is currently the case, but they would have the opportunity to have the discussions and the help amongst each other. And then, of course, they'd have those tutorial sessions in the afternoon, and an extramural program that gradually phased them back to normality. Is that enough?
Yeah, that's great. And then perhaps, I know you said Carol was going to talk next.
Yes.
That's fine, but a couple of questions for when Aidan gets his opportunity. Starting off with the online experience now, and more from a teacher's perspective, how have they found it? And then I guess as we move from, a fully online with everybody online to now having some children in the class with and that sort of combo, and as that shift happens from one to the other.
Yeah, and I'll leave that for Aidan. He does have a whole sort of slot of his own, but I can see he's making some notes, and certainly from the conversations we've had this afternoon, I know he's got lots to offer there. Carol, just a quick bird's eye view, and then we'll see what questions come.
Yeah, so as Mr. Thompson's indicated, we don't see ourselves as medical experts. I'm certainly not a medical expert. I'm an accountant, but we've managed to have available to us a medical panel made up of school doctors, parents who are in various medical positions from DSG and college, and some ex-parents, and they themselves have reached out and extended into their communities, their medical fields, to get further expertise. So our panel really has reached very far to make sure we get the most accurate information we can, even to the point that doctors on our panel are discussing with colleagues who are doctors, for example, on the bishop's panel, medical panel. So we're really just trying to cross-reference and make sure we've covered all our bases. Basically, what it boils down to is that our sense that if we get the basics right, so if the screening is working, if the hygiene measures are working, if we can get the boys to respect the physical distancing, if we get the basics right, the risk of transmission is really, really low, particularly for the kids. But that being said, as Mr. Thompson indicated, if we can't assume that the kids will not contract COVID, so we had to be ready for it, and we identified three kind of groupings of kids who we would have to be able to cater for. So the first is a child who would need to be quarantined. That is essentially a child who's had high risk exposure or close contact with a known COVID positive patient. And the definition is quite clear around what would constitute high risk. So if you had, for example, a COVID positive person and a child, and there were no masks, and they breached the 1.5 meter barrier, or there was physical contact, that, for example, would constitute high risk exposure. So those kids are asymptomatic, they don't have symptoms, but they are high risk exposure. So they need to go into quarantine. They are in single rooms. They do not get tested because they're asymptomatic. And essentially they would have to wait out their 14 days in quarantine by themselves. Again, because you'll see our policy makes reference to the fact that, preference is probably going to be for a parent to take their child into the home environment in any of these situations, simply because we're not sure a child wants to spend 14 days in quarantine at school. But that being said, we also understand that it might not be possible for a child to be taken home, and so we want to be able to provide the necessary care. So quarantine is fairly straightforward. The child is healthy but has to be in quarantine. Then we have children who are symptomatic, so they either self-identify or they are flagged in the screening process. And there are two sets of kids who are symptomatic. So there are symptomatic children who have not yet been tested or are awaiting test results. So if you're symptomatic, we will arrange for your child to be tested. AMPATH will come to the school once a day and test. So our nurses will not be swabbing, which has its whole own set of risk factors for our nursing staff. So that will be done by AMPATH. And so we'll have one group of kids who are symptomatic and are in isolation, but what we call pre-test isolation, where they're essentially awaiting test results. The turnaround time we've been given by AMPATH in Grahamstown is 48 hours. We've assumed 48 to 72 to be safe. So those kids are symptomatic but waiting their test results. Once they get their test results back and they are known positive, they then get moved out into a second isolation area where there are only known positive children. Those kids can cohort because they kind of all know they're positive. So there's a little, it's not free range, but there's a little bit more freedom. We will be employing nursing staff to look after these two isolation areas and the quarantine area specifically, because in all of this, our SAN remains a clean space. So the SAN, as we know it, remains available to boys who are not COVID ill and who need the normal SAN. So the SAN is a clean space. Our senior SAN sister plays the role of the kind of contact tracer and oversees the three areas. So as Mr. Thompson said, it's not our ideal would really be for the boys to be taken home to the care of their parents in any of the three scenarios. But should that not be possible, we believe we'll be able to provide exactly what your child needs here, and the medical panel agrees. So just with regards to the wearing of masks 24/7, as Mr. Thompson said, we're starting from our kind of point of absolute, but we are engaging on a daily basis with our medical panel. And the one thing that is being discussed, and I know it was discussed on the DSG side today, and we'll be having that conversation with our medical panel, is around whether it's necessary and at what point in the house, so whether it's in their room or what space can be regarded as a safe space for them, because is it feasible for them to wear their masks 24/7? So we are looking at these things constantly and reviewing the latest information available. So yeah, I don't know, Ellen, I'm not sure. I don't know if we want to maybe just address the kind of testing before kids come back to school, because I think that's on a lot of people's minds as to why don't we have kids tested before they come back.
That is a question that's come up, so yes, please.
So we obviously looked at it because it seemed like a logical thing to do from a layman's perspective, but the medical guidance is very clear. There's a significant false negative rate when you're testing asymptomatic patients, particularly in children. And then over and above that, there's the false reassurance from a false negative. So let's say you have a negative result, you then kind of feel more confident to kind of breach the protocols that we've put in place. So there's this kind of false reassurance of a negative test. And then there's obviously the consideration of the appropriateness of kind of mass testing in a system that's already under enormous strain. So having weighed up all three of those things, it really just didn't, it wasn't feasible. It didn't make sense to test before the kids came back.
Graham, before we move off, anything on matters medical?
No, Alan, let's leave that for the moment. And there's some other issues we'll come to later.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Carol. So obviously in our letter, we communicated around travel. Just to bring you up to date, there's nothing that's changed, but obviously we have been doing a survey and we've got lots of responses in for that survey. The responses show that a big number of parents would be driving their boys down to college, and of course that's in terms of safe options, that's a good option. In terms of being able to control things like stops along the way and small numbers and so forth. A second option that we probably have enough numbers to make it viable is to book a bus from each of the major centres. So a luxury coach travelling with staff on it from Johannesburg to Grahamstown and from Cape Town via the Garden route to Grahamstown. Either of those seem to have enough support to be worth doing. And we just need to work out what the spacing on that would look like, and if it's necessary, if we how that affects costs. So we're just having a look at that. And then from the responses, it does seem viable for us to run an aeroplane or some aeroplanes. We have the possibility of charter flights from Lanseria to the charter terminal at Port Elizabeth, which is not the public airport in Port Elizabeth. So it's considered to be quite a very low intensity place. So a good place to land. So that's the one option we're looking at. We've been in contact today with Airlink, and there is the possibility of Airlink running scheduled flights to Port Elizabeth. That would be to the public airport. So we're still just trying to find out details around that. We've got some initial sort of costings around scheduled Airlink flights, definitely from Johannesburg and possibly from Cape Town, but we're not sure yet. And then we're still awaiting to hear from other airlines around what scheduled flights might be possible. We are also still waiting to find out what permissions or what evidence we need to provide in order for the Department of Transport to authorize the flight. But because our flights will be taking place now under level 3 and interprovincial transport is permitted under level 3, the ability to get the flights permitted seems to be much easier. So that's where we're going in terms of transport. And of course, I know there are people from our over-border community who are looking at this and wondering what our thinking is around over-border. And of course, there it's much more vague because we're not sure when the borders will be open. But we have considered a number of situations. And so obviously, imagine borders that have opened and there is a 2-week quarantine period, which seems likely. One thing we've got is a number of our Andrian community who would be able to open up quarantine facilities, and you'd carry on the online program from somewhere within short reach of the school, and that is contingent upon us convincing the authorities that it's permissible to private quarantine under school control. And we've been told that there's a possibility of that. It might not be a possibility. It might be that you have to go to a government-run sort of quarantine hotel or something like that. But there's still not enough information for us to make a definite sort of finding on that. But for over-border community who can find their way to Johannesburg, we can certainly get them to the school, and we've definitely, if regulations permit, we've got plans around how we would quarantine them if that was necessary, unless they had to quarantine before they flew and there was some way they could come directly, which we don't think will be the case. And so that's really where we are in terms of our planning. And in terms of charter flights from the various centers, those seem to be quite, once they're allowed to fly, certainly all the airplanes we're talking to have got the range to do those sorts of trips and do them all the time. So we're not concerned about our ability to do that. It's really just what the regulations say and what it's going to cost. So one of our guiding principles in all of this is that there has to be some sort of value to coming back. And so we've worked to put an academic program together that doesn't disadvantage the online community, but it certainly makes it worthwhile being back here. And Aidan, just some high-level discussion around that, if you would mind.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Yes, so we've put together quite a thick document in terms of classroom protocols, how children will behave in a classroom, what process they go through when they enter a classroom in terms of sanitizing their hands, wiping down their seat, wiping down their desk, sitting 1.5 meters apart from one another. And each of the departments have actually been very, very good about the peculiarities of their particular subject. For example, visual art, you're not sharing paintbrushes and all those kind of things. So these have been very, very carefully thought through, and we're quite confident that the classroom will be a safe environment. And initially, as these children are coming back, we'll have time to test these systems. We've also put in place a whole program of human flow. So an area where you probably might make contact is if 10 kids are coming down a set of stairs and 5 are trying to get up. So there will be certain stairs that are upstairs and certain stairs that come down. Passageways will be one way, and even routes on the campus during the academic day when we are in rush would be one-way streets. So we are quite happy that the systems that we're putting in place are sound. It's going to be safe for the children. But the trick, and the headmaster has alluded to this a number of times this evening, is behavior change. So the boys are going to have to cooperate, and it'll become, after 2 weeks, second nature just to sanitize your hands as you walk into a classroom, and to wipe your seats and wipe it when you're finished, and behave in a way as if you were infectious. We want the boys to all behave in a way that they are considerate enough to everybody else, so that if they were infectious, they would not harm anybody. So those are the protocols. The online backbone will continue, so no child, whether they're here or whether they're at home, is going to in any way fall behind. And I don't believe, from what I've been picking up, that we've really lost much academic time at all. I think we've kept up to speed. The HODs give a weekly feedback on their departments to the heads and to the deputies, and actually quite delighted by the way things have gone, and they've certainly developed a good rhythm. And so there's no real warning signs there about subjects falling behind. So what this will look like is the children that choose to come back and can come back will, on the college side, attend lessons, online lessons, as active participants in the classroom. So I will have a lesson. All the boys that are in my class that are are back will come to the lesson, and I will teach the online lesson in my classroom with it projected onto the interactive screen through the data projector, and the children online and the ones in the class will be able to interact and go through the lesson. The headmaster tested it this morning without anybody in his class, but certainly the boys online really enjoyed seeing him walking around a classroom and picking up something, and it's a really nice way of being able to expand or hybridize the online process of learning and teaching. So the boys will be active participants. They will ask questions. They will make us laugh. And somebody asked, how have teachers been finding it? And it's that we've been missing, and sort of tumbling into the class and the personality and the energy and the liveliness that they bring to a class. And so that will be really good. Then, in addition to that, so the online lessons with active participants are tilted towards online lessons and engineered, and the thought into the lesson is that the online children are fully get full benefit from it, and then the active participants in the lesson in the classroom can contribute. The tutorials are tilted slightly the other way. So we'll have tutorials for grade 10 to 12. There'll be 2 tutorials a week where my boys will meet with me, and the online children will be there, and they can also be part of it. But we can go through a worksheet, we can do some prac work, we can interact, and I can just have that face-to-face confidence building or identifying what issues children are having. And then I will do that with my boys, and then I'll go across to DSG and do it with my girls as tutorial lessons, so that they're all getting that face-to-face human contact with their teachers. Quickly, I'm not going to go on much longer. Just to let you know that the half term is, we won't have lessons. Well, we'll stop lessons on Tuesday the 2nd. That will be the last day of lessons for the half term. So the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Then online lessons will start again on Monday the 8th for everybody, and the matrics will be back. The phased entry of the other grades will be announced. And then we're going to end the term on Tuesday, 5th of August for the children. We will have exams for the grade 8s to 11s and the grade 12 Cambridge boys, but no exams for matrics this term. So we're going to just go through the term until the 5th of August. The grade 8s to 11s will write their last exam on the 5th of August, and they will travel home on the 6th. Staff will stay behind a day or 2 just to get your reports done. And then there's going to be a 2-week holiday for the matrics, and a 3-week holiday for the grade 8s to 11s. And the matrics will come back 1 week early, and we're really hoping that all the overboarders will be able to come back for that matric preparation week. It's going to be a blend of revision program, of doing pracs with everybody, all the matrics, of a bit of SWAT time and a fine tuning. And then the matrics will write their trial exams from about the 31st of August into September. And that's about as far as we know. The rest of the year is a little bit vague to us. But what we do know is that the term will end for the children on the 5th of August, travel on the 6th, and then the matrics will come back 2 weeks later, and the rest of the school will come back on the 31st of August, and then continue from there. I hope that covers everything, Mr. Thompson.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Graham, can I carry on? You have some questions there.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in. Does the school have a sense of how many boys will be coming back during these different phases? Some sort of forecast to say, well, we expect so many in that period and so many in that period, and ultimately the whole school is back.
Well, for the moment, our overboard are around about 23% of our boys. So we're planning around a maximum of 75% of our boys. And from the survey, the transport survey, which wasn't, the transport survey wasn't a survey that said, are you not coming back? The transport survey seemed to indicate that a big percentage of people in every grade had some sort of transport plan in mind. we're a campus-bound school, and we want to get back to that point. So, but in short, one of the next steps, of course, is there's a document that comes out that just outlines, it's a question, how are you getting to school? What is here's the symptom checklist. Have you tested for any of these things or in the past 2 weeks? And when people receive that document, they will indicate when and how they intend to get back. And again, that's not a commitment. They might just say, I'm waiting and seeing for a few days or a month, or, we don't know. But that's still to come. But certainly the sense we get is that our boys are itching to get back. And we think we've got a safe environment for them to come back to, and a really good offering that gives them the sort of value that makes it worth coming back for. They're not going to be sitting in their rooms doing online lessons and not having that sort of contact, or the sporting program that I'm going to talk about in a moment.
And then, Alan, perhaps just a little bit about the DSG. And I sense one of the questions is coming from the parents and the other one is prompted by a boy. What is the situation when you have a teacher, your classes ordinarily take place at the DSG, and I guess you then in an online environment, and then how will it happen in terms of a more normalized engagement with the girls at the DSG?
So remember, all that we're talking about here is the initial phase in our planning, first 2 weeks with a commitment to assess and to revise. And at the same time, DSG have their own risk analysis and their own thinking. And so when we say, as far as we're concerned, the risk is green, and if DSG say, well, from their analysis, they're not quite ready. But I think certainly the sense is that we want to get back to normality. We need to do so in as responsible a way as possible. It isn't so risk averse that you get nothing done. But for the moment, if I told you it's going to be 3 weeks and then we're back to normal, I'd be misleading you. So we venture forwards in faith. We don't actually know how national and international environment is going to develop. So we really are prepared, and the sooner the better is the short answer, but with all responsibility and all the trajectories of this pandemic having played out, in a favorable way. As I was saying that, Graham, I felt like a real politician because lots of words that didn't say very much, but I think you know what I mean.
Well, you did say there when everything is green. You weren't talking about the color of the girls' dresses.
No. And then obviously what we want is when the boys get here that there's lots of extramural stuff to take their, to give them that sort of balance to their day. Mr. Mantata has been working with Mr. Pete Andrew, who's our head of sport, and he's been working around with all the clubs and societies. Mr. Mantata, I think I'm very pleased with the way many of the clubs have managed to continue online, and for the extramural program, we're sort of envisaging that same sort of blend of online and contact. And just anything to add from your side, just broad pictures.
Yeah, I think we've spent quite a bit of time thinking hard as to how do we keep the extramural program going and how do we keep the kids interested. And we're hoping that they participate in the online program. I think we're trying to monitor that to make sure that they are participating in it, and teachers are committed and everyone else is playing their part. And hopefully with the summer sport, with sports like cricket being low risk, we're hoping, we'll look into that, consult the medical team more, and maybe get the summer season going.
Yeah, so I mean that horizon, there's so much variability. Either it's going to be an early summer season or a late winter season, depending on how it plays out. But certainly what we're committed to is finding every way possible, and even if it certainly there's, I know the sports staff have done a lot of work around getting the fitness and getting a lot of challenging sort of stuff, because sometimes just routine can be not as inspiring as a bit of competitive stuff. So we're looking at all of that. And of course, an astronomers society or whatever the clubs and societies are, there's still opportunity for them to connect. And it's not mentioned anywhere else here, so I'll just mention it here. But as things stand, as we sit here today, knowing what we know, Journey is scheduled to go ahead, and Peter Andrew is running around the Eastern Cape, or not physically, but at the moment electronically, just making sure that all of that's in place. So we are anticipating Journey to be taking place. And Aidan has spoken about the term dates, and if you were desperately trying to write those down while he was speaking, don't panic. The minute we hear what phasing we're allowed, we will send out a document that has all of those dates written on them. But obviously, if we're told that we can only bring in grades at a much later date, it's going to change all of that. So we just want to be sure that we're doing what, or that we're going to say what we can actually deliver. And then it's also not mentioned in this presentation, but I thought it useful just because we have so much overlap. Mr. Brady, just a quick high-level view as to what the preppies are up to.
Thanks, Ellen. Yeah, it's we very much, as you know, we very much on par with you guys in terms of all the protocols and processes for managing children in a COVID environment. We are fortunate in that we are managing to fall into a different category of schools. You would have all heard the Minister talk about small schools, and because of our split campus, Prep falls nicely into that definition of a small school. So our phasing return is a little bit different. We can bring our grades 0, 3, 6 and 7 day scholars and our grade 6 and 7 boarders all back on the 8th of June, followed 2 days later by the grades 1, 2, 4 and 5 day scholars. Our protocols in terms of boarding don't allow us yet to return our grades 1 to 5 boarders. But that will unpack as you've got your phasing going. We'll unpack that phasing as we go. Otherwise, as with college and with DSG, we've been through our own risk analysis. We've done our own preparations at Prep, and we're pretty good to go and very excited about getting little children back onto campus, as I hope our parents are too.
Thank you very much, Brendan. And obviously, if people have any questions to submit there, they are welcome to. It's a very wintry night here tonight in Grahamstown. We've been hit by the first proper winter's night. The clock is chiming 6 p.m, so we're scheduled to finish. I'm not going anywhere. So Graham, if you've got questions, if people need to go, they can. But if you've got some questions you want to send through, and if you don't get to them or anything like that, the email is there. I'll be very happy, and we'll answer all questions as they come. What have you got there, Graham?
Once the boys are back, what is their opportunity to leave the campus? Let's say it was their birthday or something like that, or a sleep out. And then what is the opportunity for parents to see their children once they're back?
So in the first 2 weeks, we are limiting all of those sorts of contacts, and we're knowing that we're not a perfect bubble. There, of course, are day boys who are coming and going, there's staff who are coming and going, but we just want to limit as much as we can for those first 2 weeks, just so that we can get some sense of equilibrium. And then in all predictability, things like deliveries already, it's legal to have things delivered, so we don't expect deliveries to be a big issue. In terms of visits, once we've got all of our classes in place and everybody is intact, and we know that we're not dealing with any immediate imported illness, we would anticipate those things. Certainly, sleep outs, we would have the normal sort of request around, screening and those sorts of things, but a sleep out is de facto what we would be experiencing with a day boy every every day in terms of risks. So those would be a probability in the next sort of phase. And similarly with occasion, visits. If people do it properly, everything is possible. It's just making sure that all of those things are done according to protocol.
And then, Alan, I can't find the actual question, but I remember it. It was just a comment on the analysis and the depth of the analysis that the school have gone into, and just reflecting how impressed this particular person was with the analysis. And I suppose the other side of that is another question around, it's all a very serious affair, and these children are going to be coming back to school, and, all of the downtime they're going to be having. I mean, what, in terms of having fun for these children while they're back, and, being occupied and being kept busy, and, not being allowed to play touch rugby, but, they need to be kept busy and stimulated and have fun while they're back at school.
Yeah, so I think there's an error in that question, because the program that we're about to send out, it's an intense program. It's lessons, it's tutorials, it's sport. It might not be that in week 1 you're playing touch rugby, but there's a lot of physical sport on the go, and we're working towards the fact that in week 3 you are playing touch rugby. And so the program is an intense one. It's a full school day, as they would have now, right up to sort of evening prep sessions. And so it's not true that there's going to be any downtime at all. Well, no, it is true there will be downtime. It'll be the normal structured downtime. But it's not that they're going to be sitting around. And I have a son at home, and I know what's probably informing that question. You can find those long spells where they've got nothing to do. And that's really the benefit of getting them back to school, so that you get the structure, you get the routine, you get the movement from place to place during the course of a day. They're not stuck in one place doing just with a computer. So that's where we're heading.
And thank you. Look, Alan, there are lots of questions, and I'm sure that, we'll go through all of those, and those that need to be answered directly can be answered. But I think we've certainly covered the main issues that have come out to group them all together. But I'm sure that you will make sure that if there's anything, lots of international questions and very specific issues around permits and travel. And one that comes to mind is, what do you do if you've got a child in grade 7 and grade 9? You're now going to need to make 2 separate trips, or will allowances be made for that? So
yes, so the boarding houses are open, and our phasing, if we get the permission to do our phasing, it's based purely on our own internal sense of needing to have control. So it's not that there won't be upper house open for a grade 9 and they not happen to be scheduled to arrive. If you've got a grade 9 and a grade 7 or whatever, there is inherent flexibility in our system. So I wouldn't worry about that at all. And in terms of permits, I mean, we really are working hard to try and get something to feed back to our international parents. And we know it's a serious issue that is nagging at them. Our problem is just finding the right person to talk to, and them having the right sort of line of response. It's still very much under construction, and we certainly will feedback the minute we know. Graham, is that?
No, I think that's that. Thank you, Alan.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Please don't hesitate to contact us, and thank you very much to the panel who were with us this evening. And we just hope that this is one more step in a process that is it's a frustratingly slow and incremental process, but we certainly do look forward to at some point seeing you all back in town and being able to celebrate just being together again. But thank you very much for joining us this evening. And we'll call another one of these as the needs dictate. But thank you very much. And thank you very much, Graham, for your help this evening.
A pleasure. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.